Hello, my name is John Shipley. I am your host and beat reporter of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast, and we are back to give you another episode of our long continuing Jaguars coverage. We have been your beat reporter for On SI every single day since August 2019, and we are continuing to move forward through another offseason together. As always, you can always find our 100% free 24/7 boots on the ground Jaguars coverage when you follow us on social media at Jaguars on SI on Facebook and Twitter. You can also find us at www.si.com/NFL/Jaguars. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. My name is John Shipley. I'd say probably the last week, 2 weeks, I did a final at the end of minicamp, Jaguars offseason 53-man projection. Not my final one I'll put out. That will be after training camp. But this one will be was a reflection of what I saw from the Jaguars over the course of the offseason program. So during this episode and the next episode, we will go over my picks for offense and defense on that list. Starting off on offense, at quarterback, we had Trevor Lawrence and Nick Mullins making the roster. There's not a lot to talk about when it comes to the quarterback position for the Jaguars in the 53-man roster. Nick Mullins is clearly the backup quarterback. They signed him to that level of deal in free agency, and that's exactly what he's been for the Jaguars throughout the course of the offseason program. The clear number 2 quarterback. I think Minnesota Vikings fans know this. I don't think Jacksonville Jaguars fans know it, but if he gets into a game, it has the level to get very interesting. The possibilities at the least. He's a gunslinger. You don't see that a lot in a lot of backup quarterbacks. I don't think Mac Jones was that. I don't necessarily think C.J. Beathard was that. Just that backup quarterback who, once it's his time to get into the show, he's willing to go out there, try to move around and make plays. And I think Nick Mullins, I think you've already seen that during the Jaguars offseason program, a very aggressive passer, willing to push the ball downfield. I don't think there are a lot of similarities necessarily between him and Trevor Lawrence. I think, he'll obviously have some stuff that he can run well and that he likes. He has a long history with Grant Udinski, their time together in Minnesota, and plus that Minnesota offense was an offshoot of of a Sean McVay offense. And Liam Cohen's offense is going to be also an offshoot of a Sean McVay offense with Liam Cohen's own spin on it, much like Mullins played in a McVay offense with Kevin O'Connell spin on it in Minnesota for the last couple of years. I don't think outside of those two, there's much really to discuss. I think, the other 2 quarterbacks, you have John Wolford, Seth Hennigan. I've said for a few years now that, I think it'd be wise for the Jaguars to invest in a young, number 3 quarterback or something. There's somebody to develop off to the side. See what he can turn into. If he can turn into a good backup, maybe he can even turn into a trade piece and trade talks in the offseason or trade deadline. They haven't really done that. They did add a guy in Seth Hennigan from Memphis in, undrafted free agency. Maybe they keep 2 practice squad quarterbacks, which is very possible. That's been done. If they only kept 1, I think it'd have to be Wolford, just because he has experience with Cohen, experience in the scheme. He has started games that Cohen's been the offensive coordinator for before. He makes a lot of sense. At running back, not a lot of surprises. Had 4 running backs making it at Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby, Bayshaw Tuden, and LaQuint Allen. Now, the running back room is one of the most talked about rooms for the Jaguars heading into the season, simply because it just isn't clear whose room it is. I'm not sure how much clearer it's going to even become before week 1. I very easily think it could be a case where a guy has to go in there during the regular season and stake his claim to it with consistent and sustained periods of positive play. So there's a lot of debate about the room. Obviously, ETN, he's rushed for 1,000 yards in back-to-back seasons before in his career. He's the experienced guy who has produced like a pro. Tank Bigsby is obviously the bruising running back of the group. If they go to a gap scheme in terms of their running scheme, I think you could see a lot of work go his way, as I've been saying over the last couple of weeks. Bayshaw Tuden just signed his rookie deal. Probably the best pure athlete they have at that position. but somebody who's still, fourth round pick, maybe a little green. They're still going to develop over the course of training camp and see where he is in week one. But Quentin Allen, I think if he can find his way onto the field, could do some interesting things. Not a standard build for a running back, but very good pass protector, very good pass catcher. He has looked good coming out of the backfield over the course of the offseason program. So a couple of guys to watch there. I had 5 wide receivers making it, though you very well could see 6 be the minimum here. Just because, Travis Hunter playing both ways, you're going to maybe want some added depth to the wide receiver position. But I had Brian Thomas Jr., Travis Hunter, De'Ami Brown, Parker Washington, and Trenton Irwin making it. I had Irwin making it because he has a leg up in terms of special teams value. I know people hate hearing it. They hated hearing it when I said it over and over again when I projected Tim Jones to make the 53-man roster. But if you're the number 5, number 6 receiver, your value is on special teams. The odds of you getting on the field without injury are low. And as a result, to justify, their place on the roster, because you're not asking, Travis Hunter is not going to play in special teams. Brian Thomas Jr. is not going to play in special teams. De'Ami Brown is not going to play any. You're not asking those guys to do it. So you have to ask somebody to do it. So that's really why I had Trenton Irwin. Now, Joshua Cephas, Eli Pankel, both stood out over the course of the offseason program. I think that they will definitely fight for that. I think if they give out 6 receiver spots, though, it'll probably be out between those 7 guys. Some interesting names for the Jaguars this time around, at the wide receiver room, especially when you get past the clear 3 starters. You can even say maybe the clear top 4 guys because Parker Washington just looks like he's entrenched, etc. But overall, you see a group that needs some rounding out still, in my opinion. Tight end, I only had them bring in 3. Brendan Strange, Hunter Long, and Johnny Munt. I think it's a balanced group. You have 2 really, really good blockers in Hunter Long and Johnny Munt. 2 guys who have played in the scheme before, who the Jaguars, know well, whether it's from a coaching connection or a front office connection. Some guys who have battled adversity in the past. The Jaguars seem high on them. They seem high on their potential. And the Jaguars, I think, are going to use a good bit of 12 and 13 personnel this year. So outside of them, Herbert's little brother, he looks like an interesting guy. Quentin Morris was obviously signed over the course of the offseason. He's somebody who's a really strong plus blocker. I think if they kept a 4th tight end, he'd be the one. But at the end of the day, just how things shake out, just wasn't able to keep more or justify more tight ends on the roster. All right, for the final offensive position group, I had them keeping 9 offensive linemen. I had them keeping Walker Little, Ezra Cleveland, Robert Hainsey, Patrick McCrary, Anton Harrison, Fred Johnson, Chuma Edoga, Wyatt Milam, and Jonah Monheim. Now, this isn't really a hard one. They're keeping the 3 incumbents, in my opinion. They're keeping the 4 guys they signed in free agency, and Hainsey, Johnson, Edoga, and McCary. And they are keeping the 2 rookies, Wyatt Milam and Jonah Monheim. Now, I personally think, and this isn't because it's anything maybe I've seen over the course of the offseason, I just think, if they're sticking true to their word of they want the young guys to play and they want to see what they have in their rookies, you would have to think Wyatt Milam starts sooner than later at left guard. But even if that was the case, even if he's in line to be the week 1 starter at left guard, I think probably not a ton of trade value in Ezra Cleveland because of his contract. So probably a sound backup. I didn't have Luke Fortner making it. I just think, one, doesn't have positional versatility, which they've made a focus in every guy they picked up. Jonah Monheim does. He obviously has very short arm length, doesn't have the prototypical build of a guy playing along the offensive line, especially on the edge of it. He's played all the positions in his career. And I think if they're keeping, the veteran center on a contract year versus the rookie center they picked, who they have cheap for obviously the next 4 years to try to develop, you'd think if they want to stay true to their adage of relying on the young guys and playing the young guys, that the guy they drafted to develop would be the guy to make it. But I could see that being a training camp battle to really watch over the next couple of months, etc. So thank you guys for listening to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. We'll be back tomorrow. As always, please make sure you like, follow, and subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And go ahead and find us on YouTube at Sports Videos on SI.